Brother, we all know the Day of Atonement is coming this coming week. We also know that we have been commanded to afflict the soul, or to fast as we typically refer to it. The primary Hebrew word for afflict is anan, A-N-A-H, and it means to humble, oppress, be bowed down, to become low, to be beat down. And it's used in various ways in scriptures, but this is actually the definition of the word. Now, with that in mind, if you would notice with me what Jesus told his disciples over in Matthew chapter 6, Matthew 6, part of the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 6, verse 16 and 17, we'll read Matthew 6, verse 16, and I'm reading this from the NIV. When you fast, uh, do not look somber as the hypocrites do, for they disfigure their faces to show others they are fasting. Truly, I tell you, they have received their reward in full. Verse 17, but when you fast, put oil on your head and wash your face. What he said was, when you fast, not if. And that's an interesting concept, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So I have entitled this sermon, Afflict Your Souls. I also want us to notice when someone asked Jesus why his disciples did not fast, he answered them. And I always, like I've told you this before, when somebody asks Jesus a question, then it says, and he answered them, I like it because there's no if, ands, buts about it. They ask, he answers, we know what he thought, and we know what he says. And so let's go to Matthew chapter 9, one verse, verse 15, Matthew 9:15. And Jesus said unto them, can the children or the friends of the bridegroom mourn as long as the bridegroom is with them? But the days will come when the bridegroom shall be taken from them. Yeah, they're going to crucify him. He's going to be dead. So he's going to be gone. That's just, and then shall they fast. And you can also see this in Mark 26, 19 through 20, Luke 5, 33 through 38. We're not reading those. But I also find it very interesting that there are some today who read what Jesus stated here and he asks, did Jesus command that we should fast today? The reason I know that there are some do this because I've been asked that in the Church of God more than one time from different people. Well, I read this and it says, but is he commanding us to fast? Well, I want us to realize, even though Jesus did not say you must fast or you shall fast, the obvious sense of his teaching, of his words, clearly shows fasting is expected of us. He didn't say if, he said when. And that's exactly what it does mean. Because, brethren, fasting is something that believers do. Just like believers are expected to use that term, we ought to, we should, whatever term we would best use, do things such as prayer, Bible study, giving of tithes, offerings, meditation, service to others, and the list can go on and on and on. There's a whole list of things that we, quote, should be doing, even though there's not so much a command to do these things. The intent, obviously, of all of these is there. Now, the one distinct difference with fasting from this other list, prayer, Bible study, and all of those things, is interesting, is because this is something we cannot be doing every day of our lives. I mean, we just think about it. We can only fast for certain periods of time, and then we get right back to the normal routine of eating and drinking. Why? Because we have to. We're physical. We have to do that. But when you fast, not if you fast, when you fast. And so we see this. I also, brethren, want us all to understand and to realize God's people are a fasting people. Both the Old and New Testament offers many examples that God's people are a fasting people. And what I'm meaning by that is fasting on occasions even other than the command where we are told to fast or afflict our souls on the Day of Atonement. That's a command. There isn't any question about it. For example, and not going to look at verses about these, but we have verses on them. For example, Moses, David, Elijah, Esther, David, Nehemiah, Anna the prophetess, John the Baptist disciples. Certainly we have to assume John the Baptist did. Paul, Cornelius, Jesus. All of these people fasted for periods of time apart from the Day of Atonement. We can see that. I know there have to be others that did as well. Also, leaders during the time of the Bible era, and what I mean by that, during the time when the Bible was lived out, when it was being recorded, when it was the Bible era. Also, leaders at that time, even like some have even done all the way into our day, where they have called for national or group fasting when some kind of threat occurred or on a nation or when a serious decision needed to be addressed. We even have in this country a national day of prayer, and fasting has been somewhat added into that by some. And so we recognize that there are people in the Bible and even in today's culture and society that people are somewhat expected to be fasting. Let me give you a couple. Let me give you a real short list. I mean, and some verses to look up of a few examples to consider. I'm not going to read the verses. I just want to list them for you, give you the verse. Okay, and I have them numbered. Number one, King Jehoshaphat. And this is an interesting. The ones I'm going to show are interesting. The ones that I'm picking out. And we're not reading the verses. 2 Chronicles 20, verse 1 through 4. Number two, the king of Nineveh. That's in Jonah 3, verse 6 through 10. You read that and you will see he even commanded that their cows, their livestock, fast. Number three, Ezra. I ain't going to address that one, but it's in Ezra 8, verse 21 through 23. But all of these are interesting. I have one more. I just have four at this time. Number four, the true believers at Antioch. This was at Acts 13, verses 1 through 3. And of course, there are obviously many, many others. We also need to understand that God's people do not have a monopoly on fasting. I mean, if you just consider throughout history, even including into our present age, both Gentiles and non-Christians have fasted for various reasons. Maybe it was for some matter of ritual, or maybe it was because of some health practice. In other words, for they're fasting because they're wanting to improve their health. People fast sometimes to lose weight. There's a lot of different ways that people have fasted. Some have used fasting as a political statement, such as hunger strikes to promote a cause, whether their cause is either just or unjust, whether it's right or wrong, whether you agree or disagree. Now, as with God in his Bible and God's word, he addresses the motive for fasting. And by the motive, what I'm meaning is Why fasting? And and I want us to take a look at some of this somewhat quickly. He tells us that there are some wrong motives and some right motives for fasting in the Bible. And so we want to take a look at this. And I say reasons or motives, you can interchange those words. And first, we're going to look at some of the wrong motives or reasons for fasting. Okay, the first example I want to look at is in Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. He criticized hypocrites who fasted to show off their supposed superior religious devotion before men. Now, we read this verse. It's in Matthew 6 and verse 16, but it's classic. He's criticizing this. Matthew 6:16. Moreover, when you fast, be not as the hypocrites of a sad countenance, for they disfigure their faces that they may appear unto men to fast. Verily I say unto you, they have their rewards. And it's very clear. It's all he said. We're not supposed to do it that way. And so he's holding this up as an illustration. Don't do it that way. But you know, there's nowhere in any of this does he ever condemn them for fasting. It's the way they did it. That's the point. Also, Jesus in one of his parables, he condemned the Pharisee who bragged about his practice of fasting twice a week. Now, there's more to this fasting twice a week, and I'm not really getting into that, but he was critical. Jesus was critical of this in the parable because this Pharisee, as Jesus is rightly pointing out to us, had become prideful of his and I would use in quotes, righteous stance that he was taking, that he was righteous in doing it in what he did, and that this Pharisee despised the sinner like the tax collector. And you know this, we're not reading this, but it's in Luke 18, verse 9 through 14. Another wrong motive or reason for fasting is to try to force God's favor. We're trying to make God do something. How well do you think that's going to go? I don't think it's going to go too well. For example, I mentioned earlier hunger strikes. This is, I think, is a really good idea. I don't mean to fast for a hunger strike. I'm just saying it's a real good example of wrong motive or attitude or reason for fasting. Because when they are in most situations, and I have to say most because I don't know all situations where hunger strikes occur and what they're doing it for, but I'm saying generally speaking, their fasting could be some kind of a subtle way or subtle form of a temper tantrum. I mean, I'm putting in words. I don't think that they're going to say it like this, but it would be something along the way of, I want my way and I'm going to fast until you give it to me. And if you don't, then I'm going to die and you'll be blamed for it for the rest of your life forever. Now, that's not what they say, but that comes across as an attitude. So I think that we see that there are obviously some wrong motives, wrong reasons for fasting, and there are others. This kind of fasting that I'm using here, I want my way and I'm going to fast until you give it to me, or if I die, then you're going to be blamed forever for it. Brother, that kind of fasting comes from a motive that has a self-will attitude connected to it. It is condemned by God as being rebellious and sinful. God tells us, he gives us an illustration in the pages of the Bible. He says, on the day of your fasting, you do as you please. Go with me to Isaiah 58. Isaiah 58. Isaiah 58 in verse 1. Cry aloud, spare not, lift up your voice like a trumpet, and show my people their transgressions and the house of Jacob their sins. Verse 3. Wherefore have we fasted, saying, wherefore have we fasted, say they, and you, God, you don't see it. We've been fasting and you don't even see it. Where have we afflicted our soul? Okay, hold right there and let's understand. Really? Really? This is not afflicting the soul. And let's go on. And you, God, take no knowledge? We do this, we fast, we afflicting our souls, and you don't even pay attention. You don't even paying attention to it. Going on here, God starts speaking and says, behold, in the day of your fast, you find pleasure and exact all your labors. And so let's understand something here right off. This lack of submission to God's will only results in sin upon sin or sin after sin, and in turning God's deaf ear to the demands. He's not going to pay attention to that kind of fast. He's not going to pay any attention. I'm going to read this verse 3 in the New American Standard Bible. I think it puts it in a clearer way. Why have we fasted and the you is God, and you do not see? Why have we humbled ourselves and you do not notice? Behold, this is where God starts speaking. Behold, on the day of your fast, you find your desire and drive hard all your workers. Behold, you fast for contention and strife and to strike with a wicked fist. You do not fast like you do today to make your voice on high. In other words, he's saying, I'm not paying attention to you. When you do it this way, I'm not paying attention. You can call it fasting, you can call it afflicting your soul, you can call it whatever you want, but it's not fasting, it's not afflicting the soul, and I'm not paying any attention to it. Now, that's pretty strong whenever you understand it. He is saying how you fast is not going to cause God to pay attention. He's just not going to do it unless we're doing it his way. Remember, this is an illustration of wrong motives, wrong reasons for fasting. Now, there's a lot more we could say about wrong ways of doing it. Okay, now let's take a look at some information dealing with at the right motives or right reason for fasting. That is afflicting your soul, hence the title to the sermon. First of all, let's understand fasting is an exercise in humility. If you're taking notes, if you don't write anything else down, then get that statement. Fasting is an exercise in humility. Now, and whatever all that means, that's really what we're trying to take a look at. So let's go to Leviticus chapter 23. This is where we're commanded to afflict the soul on the Day of Atonement. First of all, we want to understand it's not a suggestion. That's a very important point to understand, even before we read this. To afflict the soul is to humble oneself with fasting. So I want us to understand afflicting the soul is not necessarily equal to fasting. It's part of it, but it's not necessarily afflicting the soul. We'll see that as we go along. So let's go to Leviticus 23. Leviticus 23, verse 27. Also, in the 10th day of the seventh month, there shall be a day of atonement. It shall be a holy convocation, and you unto you, and you shall afflict your souls. Now, we've already looked at what the word means. And offer an offering made by fire unto the Lord. Verse 29. Verse 29. For whatsoever soul it be that shall not be afflicted in that same day, he shall be cut off from among his people. That is an awesome point of knowledge here. Remember, I said earlier, the Hebrew word translated as afflict means to humble, oppress, be bowed down, to become low, to be beat down. All of those words, when we really understand it, is really an attitude. It is an exercise in humility. Remember, that's what I said, write down. Okay, so let's go on here. Verse 32. It shall be unto you a Sabbath of rest, and you shall afflict your souls in the 9th day of the month at evening. For this particular year, what this is saying is the holy day we talked about. The holy day is on Thursday. The holy day begins Wednesday night, because that's at the end of the night. That shall be the 10th of the day. I mean, that's real clear what it says. On the 10th, you shall observe the day of atonement. Well, it also says you started on the 9th. As it is ending, then you're going into the 10th. That's because we're off base with God in his reckoning of time when we start the day at midnight. Anyway, that's another point. You shall afflict your soul in the 9th day of the month at even from even unto even shall you celebrate your Sabbath. Remember, I said it is an exercise in humility. So, brethren, I want us all to please realize, unless the reason for fasting is true humility, to have a closer connection with God, to repent of sins, to seek and to do his will more faithfully, then that's a wrong motive. If that's not the reason we're doing it, we're simply fasting. It's not necessarily afflicting the soul in the way that the Bible is telling us to afflict our souls. In other words, attitude is really, really important in this. Yeah, we're going to do the physical, but the attitude is the thing that's really important here. But yes, we're also going to do without food and drink for that period of time because we're commanded. Let's go back again here to Isaiah 58, verse 6. This is again, God is speaking here. Is not this the fast that I have chosen? To loose the bands of wickedness, to undo the heavy burdens, and to let the oppressed go free, and that you break every yoke. Now, every one of these, we could talk about this, what it means, how it is to be done. That's outside. It's right on the edge, but it's outside of the sermon, other than to list them out and to see that they're there. Verse 7. Is it not to deal your bread to the hungry, and that you bring the poor that are cast out into your house? When you see the naked, that you cover him, and that you hide not yourself from your own flesh? Now, all of these need to be examined and talked about at some particular time to what God is saying. But this is all heart and attitude, and yeah, physical acts done, but it's the attitude behind all of this. Because, brethren, I want us to please realize, with afflicting the soul, it is the focus that is more on the attitude. Absolutely, of course, we're going to do the physical. We're going to do without the bread and the water. We're going to do those things, but the focus is more on attitude. Here, let's take a look at, I believe, an excellent example in showing this. It's when David's son by Bathsheba, Uriah's wife, was sick. This is when the baby was sick. David fasted with such a humble attitude. He afflicted the soul that even when God said no to his request, no to his plea for the baby's life, David accepted it. And so let's go there. 2 Samuel 12 is verse 15 through 20. 2 Samuel 12, 15 through 20. Verse 15. And Nathan departed from his house. Now, I didn't read it, but Nathan is there, and Nathan tells David, he says, I'm just kind of heavy paraphrasing it. He says, David, God knows what you did, but you're not going to die, but the baby is. And then Nathan is the prophet, and he leaves. Now, this is the setup here. And the Lord struck the child that Uriah's wife bare unto David, and it was very sick. David therefore besought God for the child, and David fasted and went in and lay all night upon the earth. And the elders of his house arose and went to him and to raise him up from the earth, but he would not, neither would he eat bread with them. Verse 18. And it came to pass on the seventh day. Now, this is telling us that he had been fasting for 7 days. Now, I stopped here because I want us to understand we don't need to fast 7 days. Now, why? Because we don't have the physical stamina. We're at the end of 6,000 years of degeneracy. I don't recommend it for most people to fast for 7 days. I'm not setting time limits of how long it is okay for us to fast, but I would say be very, 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 very cautious for anyone trying to fast 7 days. Do I think some would be able to do this? Yes. My recommendation is really be very cautious about how long you fast, whatever the fast is. I'm not saying cut things short. I'm just saying be cautious. So let's go on. It came to pass on the seventh day that the child died. And the servants of David feared to tell him that the child was dead, for they said, behold, while the child was yet alive, we spoke unto him, and he would not hearken unto our voice. Now, how will he then vex himself if we tell him that the child is dead? And David saw that they were whispering. He perceived that the child was dead. And therefore David said unto his servants, is the child dead? And they said unto him, yes, he is. Now, pay attention to what David does then. We focus on, and then he got up, and then he started eating, but look at the whole attitude here of the way he did this. Verse 20, then David arose from the earth and washed and anointed himself and changed his apparel and came into the house of the Lord and worshiped. That's attitude. Yeah, there's physical things that he did, but this is attitude. Then he came to his own house, and when he required, they set bread before him, and he did eat. He didn't just end his fast by getting up and just start, okay, give me some food. No, he went through a whole process of things. Now, I'm saying on the Day of Atonement, do we need to go through all of this? No, this is a different circumstance, but look at the heart, look at the attitude of David. That's the point that I'm making. It's the heart, the attitude. It is a humble heart. God was still first in his thinking. Let's go to Psalm 35 and verse 13, 35:13. But as for me, when they were sick, my clothing was sackcloth. I humbled, it's anan, I humbled my soul with fasting, and my prayer return into my own bosom. Brethren, let's understand. When we are more profoundly in tune with God through fasting, with afflicting the soul, I don't mean with just doing without food and water, but when we are profoundly in tune with God through afflicting the soul, God then answers in his compassion and generous ways. Go with me to Isaiah 58 and verse 8. Then shall your light break forth as the morning, and your health shall spring forth speedily, and your righteousness shall go before you, and the glory of the Lord shall be your reward. Then shall you call, and the Lord shall answer. You shall cry, and he shall say, Here I am. If you take away from the midst of you the yoke, the putting forth of the finger, the accusing, the blaming others for things that you or I are responsible for, and speaking vanity. And if you draw out your soul unto the hungry and satisfy the afflicted soul, and then shall your light arise in obscurity, and your darkness shall be as the noonday. And the Lord shall guide you continually and satisfy your soul in drought and make fat your bones, or prosperous health he's talking about. And you shall be like a watered garden and like a spring of water, whose waters fail not. And they that shall be of you shall build the old waste places. You shall raise up the foundations of many generations, and you shall be called the repairer of the breach, the restorer of the past to dwell in. Verse 13, if you then turn away your foot from the Sabbath, from doing your own pleasure on my holy day, and call the Sabbath a delight, the holy of the Lord, honorable, and shall honor him, not doing your own ways, nor finding your own pleasures, nor speaking your own words. These are profound statements, brethren. These are profound. Then shall you delight yourself in the Lord, and I will cause you to ride upon the high places of the earth, and feed you with the heritage of Jacob your father, for the mouth of the Lord has spoken it. God said this is going to happen. Now, are there people who have this heart and this attitude in today's world, and in the Church of God today, that have this and they still die? Yes. Yes. We're appointed unto all are appointed once to die, and then the judgment of the resurrection. Now, there's a lot more to that statement, but yes, people even in God's church are going to die, even if they have that kind of. Some people in God's church are going to die today because they even have that heart and that attitude, that submissiveness to God. And he's going to answer them, but he's going to answer them in death, and they're going to be sealed. They're going to be waiting for that crown, just like Paul said. So let's not get hung up on, well, I know people who had this and they died. I do too. But I think that I answered that. Now, over in 2nd Chronicles 33 through 1 through 20, I'm not reading all of those verses, just want you to understand, but that whole context. This is where we can see where one of Judah's most wicked, if you want to use that term, most wicked King Manasseh, was severely punished for leading God's people into absolute despicable idolatry. He was considered to be the most wicked king. And he also reigned for 55 years. He reigned the longest of any king, which is also interesting. Yet, when he showed the slightest sign of turning from sin, he humbled himself through fasting. God was moved by Hezekiah, by the king's, by his appeal, and and he listened to his plea, and God restored him to his kingdom. Now we're going to read two verses. 2 Chronicles 33, and we're going to read verses 12 and 13 because the other is kind of the filler around it, but these are the point that we're focusing on. 2 Chronicles 33, verse 12. And when he was afflicted, this is Manasseh, he sought the Lord his God and humbled himself. He beat down, he humbled himself. He was oppressed. He took, this is the right attitude here. This is why this is worded in this way. He humbled himself greatly before the God of his fathers and prayed unto him as God, and God was entreated of him and heard his supplication and brought him again to Jerusalem unto his kingdom. Then Manasseh knew that the Lord, he was God. Brethren, if we will simply let it, and I mean the it is fasting, afflicting of the soul, like no other discipline, I'm meaning like prayer, Bible study, meditation, all of those things some of those things I listed before. It can drive home to the pit of our stomach our total, absolute dependence on God for life itself. Is this, and I'll use the word again, is this discipline of fasting something that can actually turn a person's life totally, completely around? And the answer is absolutely yes. How do I know? We just read an illustration of it. I mean, if for no other reason, this should lead us to genuine, heartfelt gratitude and praise toward God, more of a thank you, Father, than of a give me, Father attitude. And yes, I mean, even right in the midst of the stomach growling and the breath smelling and the whole bit. Yeah, it's a thank you, God attitude as a woe is me. That's not afflicting the soul. I'm not saying that do it in the right attitude, you're not going to have stomach ache because your stomach is hurting. We're living at the end of 6,000 years of degeneracy. I think it's very likely a lot of us are going to have, stomach pains and pain, the stomach's going to be growling, all of that. Yeah, so. Well, what is the heart behind it? What is the attitude behind it? Let's fast, afflict the soul. Let's fast so we can truly draw closer to God and become more attuned to his will. What does he want? Not necessarily what I want. Our stomach is growling and it's been, right at 20 hours since you've eaten or had anything to drink. And oh, I would really love to have you fill in the blank, hamburger, taco, whatever it is that you want, we're focusing on the wrong thing. I also realize, brethren, very clearly, I understand that we can get carried away with the way we approach these things physically, with blessings and successes, that we even forget that it is God and it is not our gifts or our energies that had caused us to be able to fast for a day or 2 days or whatever it is and not really feeling a lot of pain. So it's not us. It's a gift from God. Now, I'm just saying that. I want us to understand. And I want to give here a couple of bullets. Attitude to think about as we do fast, because see, in just a few days, we're all going to be fasting together. Day of Atonement. So the first bullet I have is let's fast, repenting when our accomplishments cause us to become proud and to look down on others who seem to somewhat lag behind. I have a very quick story. Years ago, there was a woman who was in the church. She has long since died, but she was from some volcanic ash island, now living in the United States, she and her husband. And because of all the health issues that she had, because, excuse me, because of having grown up in that horrible, horrible condition that she was in, she came to the Day of Atonement on a cot because she couldn't stand up. You follow what I'm saying? But she probably had one of the best attitudes of any person I've ever known who was fasting. Now, some may question her whether she really should have been there. Okay, where would you have wanted her to have been? I would want her to be around God's people to encourage her and, yeah, encouraging us. Okay, the next one, number 2, if you're numbering these, let's fast when we are overwhelmed and discouraged by setbacks in our personal lives due to all kinds of things such as finances or physical and emotional health or pain or relationship problems, lack of spiritual growth, a recurring sin, or whatever it is. We need to throw ourselves before God in total dependence and hope in Him. We fast. We afflict our souls when we find ourselves in those kinds of conditions, or if hopefully we don't, but I know some of us have been there from time to time. And then I have one more. There's a lot more we could do, but I just have one more. Let's fast so that God will give us the inward desire and the strength to obey His awesome and loving word. As we go into the fast, that's got to give us the physical strength, the spiritual and the physical strength and emotional strength that we need to be able to do the fast the way He would want us to do it. I see no problem in doing that. You do that, and we're already starting focusing our attitude on thank you, not so much on give me. Because you see, brother, I really believe that as we do this, God gives us the spiritual strength and enthusiasm and strength that we need to go through whatever it is, no matter how bad the stomach rolls. Now, with what we've just been looking at, I'd like for us to address some aspects of fasting from the physical side. In other words, are there some things that we can do to help us even during the time of a fast? If you don't do any of these and you do all this other, it's going to be an awesome fast. I don't care what you feel like, you know. But with that attitude and have an awesome fast, but if you can do some physical things to help relieve some of the physical things, wouldn't we like both? And that's what I'm going to try and give here. Unless there are some real physical problems, and there could be, like told you about the lady that they would bring her and she would be on a cot. She couldn't even stand, but she still fasted. Unless there's some real physical problem. The affliction involved in fasting is really only a slight discomfort, not something that is totally going to disable a person. I mean, you may feel weak and have a horrible headache and all those kind of things, but it's not going to disable a person. That's the first thing. If you enter in with that attitude, unless there's some real physical issues going on, like this example I gave with this woman on the cot. In fact, I would think for most of us, when we feel afflicted because we've missed a couple of meals and some water, then physically speaking, the fasting or the affliction has been reached. Okay. So before we fast, here's some things, and I know many of you know this, but there may be people on the phone or the internet that, for whatever reason, maybe they've never fasted or maybe they've never heard this before. So before we fast, it helps to prepare mentally and emotionally by accepting that fasting will involve some discomfort. It also helps to be prepared physically by not gorging ourselves with food right up until the time of the fast. I mean, we got 30 more seconds so I can get in 3 more bites and another glass of water or whatever. That's gorging. That's hoarding food, thinking that we're going to be able to hoard up energy. It doesn't work that way. In fact, from a medical, and I'm not a medical doctor and I don't play one on television, the saying goes, but doing so simply tends to make us even hungrier. You can test it out if you don't believe what I'm saying, but from, from medical communities, that's actually what they say. So in other words, it's better to simply taper off sometime beforehand. Drinking water right before it doesn't tend to cause that kind of a problem. In fact, to be hydrated may even help, but not the food, not immediately before. Many people who do not fast on a regular basis, they have headaches. And as a general rule, headaches are often not so much caused by the fasting itself, but rather by caffeine withdrawal. So therefore, the best to do is to avoid caffeine probably for several days before fasting. So I would rather have a headache 3 days before fasting when I'm not fasting than I would to be affected by that when I'm fasting. Because I'm humbling myself before God. The other one is just straight physical. That's me. If you understand, but do it the way you want to do it. Have the headache. Just don't focus on self. I'm trying to help not to focus on self during the time of the fasting. So instead of feeling self-pity, it's good to use this as somewhat of an opportunity to even acknowledge before God that we are simply fragile children of dust before him. And we understand we're going to have aches and pains that our life gives us because of things that we do. And so what we're doing is we're coming before him, letting him know that we need him as our life giver to give us the help and the strength that we need before we even get there. He is our life sustainer. Also, understanding fast would only be a pointless exercise in endurance if we are not coupling it with some soul searching prayer, studying of God's word, meditating. And I even suggest, this is me. I'm not quoting these, I'm not showing these things out of the Bible because I don't know if I can back it up with Bible verses. I think I can just back it up out of 60 years of fasting on the Day of Atonement and other days as well. Also, even singing some praise songs to God. Even on, I'm talking about during the time of the fast. I'm not talking about during services, of course. I'm talking about when we're on our own, before and after. In other words, it would be more than simply going without food and water. Because if we don't approach it with this kind of heart and attitude of serving God, that's all we're doing. We're not really afflicting the soul. We're just simply doing without food and water. So I want us to remember, brethren, the point of fasting is to focus on God, not on ourselves, not on our complaining about our empty stomach. It is about attitude. It is about attitude. Our attitude about God. It's not about us. It's about God. Even the fasting, doing that food and drink during this period of time. It's not about us. It's about God. So I believe that when we keep this purpose in mind while we're fasting, while we're afflicting the soul, God will give us the energy to fulfill his purpose. He's going to help us go through it. And if we have the right heart and attitude, we're going to go through it, in a very positive way, which is what God wants. That's all part of what it is. And so it is we do physically do without the food and the water, the food and the drink. We do that. But the focus really is about our heart and our attitude toward God. Praising him, thanking him for all he's doing. Whatever the messages that are about that particular day, focus on that during the service. But it's about God. This day is really about how we approach God. And that is a positive thing to think about. So I'm looking forward to seeing many of you on God's holy day, on the Day of Atonement. So the Aaronic Blessing. And the Lord spoke unto Moses, saying, speak unto Aaron and to his son, saying, on this wise ye shall bless the children of Israel, saying unto them, the Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious unto you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. And they shall put my name upon the children of Israel, and I will bless them. Happy Sabbath. We love you. Happy preparation for the Feast of Atonement.